In 1945, Manchester hosted the first PanAfrican Conference. It was important because of the delegates that attended: George Padmore, Jomo Kenyatta and Amy Ashwood Garvey, Marcus Garvey's first wife. To commemorate this anniversary of that event, Manchester again held a Pan-African Conference. The conference will be over 3 days, 3 venues, and attended by over 300 people, including me. But unlike the majority of the people attending, I don't fully understand what Pan-Africanism is and what it means to be a Garveyite. I've spoken to Colette Williams, the event manager, and she told me that Dr. Johnson, a leading black psychologist and Garveyite, will be in Liverpool taking part in the slavery trail. I've managed to arrange an interview with him, so I guess I'm off to Liverpool.
Pan-Africanism is the black man's oldest formal ideology. It is an ideology that posits that all people of African descent are members of one human family, and that we should identify principally as members of that human family. So that means that being African is more important and should be more primary than being Muslim or Christian, than being a Mason or an Elk, than being a member of any fraternity, than identifying with any particular language, any particular culture. Being African is our primary identity. And what is also fundamental to Pan-African thought and Garveyism as the highest expression of Pan-Africanism, if you will, is that as Africa goes, so goes all of Africa's children. So there is no elevation of the African in Britain without an elevation of the African in Africa. There is no elevation of the black man and woman in America without an elevation of Africa. And the reason that is when you look at nations and the respect that are given to their citizens globally, the respect that you get is a reflection of the respect that your mother country gets. So when we look around the world, we see Chinese people are generally respected no matter where they go. They might be despised in secret, but in public they are respected. Why? Because China is respected. And so the energy and power of China, okay, is carried by every citizen of that country.
And I agree with the queen who spoke just before me. She's right. We have to be more inviting of so-called mixed race Africans into revolutionary circle. Because if we don't bring them into us, the enemy will recruit them into his army. And we have President Obama to be shown as the best example of what can be done with a mixed race African.
Do you think we've got a black president, or do you think we've got a half-white president? How do you see it? How does your organisation see somebody like that?
Okay. First off, we have to recognize something. The mixed race phenomenon, the describing of Africans with a white mother or father as biracial or multiracial or mixed race, is a rather new phenomenon. When you look at the history of slavery, African slavery, in both Europe and America, you will see that the child who was the product of the rape of the slave master was still considered to be a member of the African stock, although they may have been called mulatto, to be identified as such. They were not segmented from the other blacks. We don't see a separating out of the so-called biracial African, and I say so-called because he was never called biracial before then. So I, again, agree with Marcus Garvey that if you have one African parent or two African parents, you are an African. So we don't get into biracial. You're black.
White supremacy is about white control, power, and authority. And if it is in the best interest of white supremacy to put a black face in place to protect white power, that's what it will do. And many of you fell for that strategy.
One quick thing I wanted to go back to Obama.
Yeah.
The reason I'm disappointed in President Obama has nothing to do with his mother being a white woman, because as I said, a so-called biracial African is an African to me. You see, you mentioned you were biracial. Yeah. You're just as much my sister as a sister from the middle of the Congo, blue, black, purple. African is African.
Oh, thank you.
I'm disappointed in President Obama because he has done absolutely nothing to not only assist black folk, but he's done nothing to stop the abuse against black folk. Look at all the young black defenseless males that have been murdered in America, and the president hasn't put forth one piece of legislation about police brutality. Not one thing. The Michael Brown, the Trayvon Martins, the Eric Garners, the young brother in Charlotte. That situation just happened in Charlotte, North Carolina. Sandra Bland in Texas, okay, who was a follower of my work. Rest in peace to her. All these black men and women, boys and girls being murdered, and the president of the United States doesn't do anything, while at the same time he aggressively champions the causes of lesbians, white women, homosexuals, illegal immigrants, and does nothing for the people who built the country. That's why I'm disappointed in him, not because he's biologically quote unquote half white. I'm disappointed in him because he's psychologically all white.
Day one was held at the Manchester Metropolitan Student Union building. It was a collaboration between PAC 45 Young Roots and the Pan-African Congress. It focused on the youth and was aimed at encouraging dialogue between young Pan-Africanists.
Sometimes, like the men, the African men, can be oppressors, so it's like one and the same.
Can we not incorporate feminism into the black struggle?
The feminist movement was a movement by white women.
So as a black people, we need to be mass. Whatever activity or movement like this there is, we need to make sure we are there.
Live righteous with yourself, humble yourself, and then be loyal to people.
I'm a young person and I'm aware of what's going on, and it's hard to see young black people who are like you facing the same troubles as you.
Joan Cunningham is a delegate. She's also stereotypical of the people attending the conference in that her parents are West Indian.
Parents were born in Jamaica. I was actually born in Bristol. But I see myself as African. I do think that there is a need for Pan-Africanism within this country. It enables people to kind of, if not already enhance the knowledge they've got, it will enable them to develop that knowledge in terms of their histories and current issues that are impacting upon us today that really is continued from way back.
Do you feel there may be some problem within the black diaspora in relation between the African people and the West Indian people, and then within that you've got the various West Indian communities, the Barbadians, the Trinidadians, the Jamaicans, and there is some kind of infighting within that area. So do you think the Pan-African organisation is helpful in fetching that kind of unity?
In terms of the Pan-Africanism, it will enable to kind of move away from that kind of thinking, and instead of sort of saying, yes, you can acknowledge, if some people will acknowledge that they're Jamaican, and the other thing for me as well, it'll also acknowledge the rebellions that took place that fought against slavery and the positive elements of that as well, in terms of what was going on at that time, in terms of the kings and the queens that were ruling in Africa at that time that was also fighting against slavery, which a lot of people are not aware of unless they're specifically interested in going into studying black history. And I believe black history is world history as well.
Back in our seats within 5 minutes.
Okay. We call upon the spirit light of Cecile Fatima.
The second day of the conference began with libation, a process for honouring a memory to ancestors who have passed away, a ritual of pouring a liquid as an offering, but there seemed to be some confusion.
Spin to the east. Right, spin to the east. Spin and face the east. Spin to the east. Spin to the west. Spin to the south. That's not that. Come on. Spin to the north. Right. Now you're looking towards Kemet. We stand firm in Kemet. Black, black, black. Okay. Right. This should take 4 minutes now. Right. Yeah, thanks. That's you. That's you. That's you. That's you.
Anyway, it's my great pleasure to be here for the 70th anniversary of the famous Manchester Pan-African Congress. I was also here for the 60th anniversary of the famous Manchester Pan-African Congress. And I was here for the 50th anniversary of the famous Manchester Pan-African Congress. Somebody actually asked me this morning, was I here in 1945? I won't point out who that person was.
Professor Hakim Ade is a historian lecturing at Chichester University on African history. When did you first develop a history in Pan-Africanism?
When did I first have an interest in Pan-Africanism? Probably when I was around 13, 14, something like that. It was to do with, how I was treated. It was to do with trying to deal with racism in Britain. So, trying to find out more about Africa and Africans internationally. So starting to look into history, culture, and so then beginning to read those who were in some way involved in Pan-African movement. People like Frantz Fanon, for example. I would be about 13 or 14 years old. And that's also when I started to look into African history and the history of Africans globally. They had a very definite politics, and that grew out of the circumstances in 1945. The fact that they had common experiences of being colonial subjects, and also the Congress was organised at the end of the Second World War in very special circumstances.
Obviously the issues that were addressed in this conference in 1945, how would you say that they're different in today's 2015 society?
They're different in the sense that we're not talking about the liberation of Africa from colonial rule in the same way, but many of the same issues about how to organise, who is the key force which is going to change society and the world. Many of those things are that they discussed in 1945, about the role of workers, about the role of the majority of people in society, whether in Nigeria or Britain or the US or Jamaica. Those things are still very true today. Today we talk about a new scramble for Africa. So there was an old scramble at the end of the 19th century. There was another scramble in the 1930s, and now there's a new scramble, and that involves not just the old colonial imperialist powers, Britain, France, the US and so on, but also new powers like China, like the other BRIC nations, India and Russia and so on. And in fact, China is the major economic power in Africa at the moment. And in response to China's power, the Americans are developing their military power, AFRICOM and so on and so forth. So it's a very, very dangerous situation, and it's resulted in the invasion of Libya, the invasion of Mali, military intervention in Cote d'Ivoire, many other places. So a very dangerous moment for Africa. It is sad, but that tells you something about the economic system and the political system which dominates Africa. And what that means is that the majority of Africans aren't decision makers. The decision-making power is in the hands of a few rich people, and it's that system has to be changed.
Alexander Leach, another delegate, explained why she's attending the event.
Celebrating this event, this anniversary, it's important for people of African descent. I definitely identify myself as African via the Caribbean, via the UK. But yeah, my roots are definitely firmly rooted in Africa.
So your great-great-grandchildren will also be African?
Yes, they will.
But do you think the Garveyism point of Pan-Africanism is viable?
No, because unfortunately not every black person is of the same mindset and has the same thinking towards the progression of Africa and black people, unfortunately I find many black people to be asleep in terms of the institutional racism and white supremacy. So in terms of everybody, all the black people moving back to Africa, there's many black people who don't want to and don't see a reason to or a cause to, so no, I don't think that's going to work. We can have this idealistic image in our heads, and it might not be like that yet, but I don't think it should stop us from striving for that unity.
Lee Jasper, a black activist and community worker from Manchester, spent several years in London working for the Mangrove Community Association.
You know what I like about yesterday? The audience led the debate. The young people led the debate. And what was their cry to us all? Leadership. What was their cry to us all? Action. What was their cry to us all? Give us the kind of advice and guidance that you, our elders, have in order that we can now lead in the 21st century.
If you could talk to, if the audience was all black kids from Peckham, Lewisham, what message would you tell them about Pan-Africanism and why we need to have meetings like this?
I think what my message would be is that Pan-Africanism contains the tools to unlock your future, right? And those tools are not about trying to integrate, trying to accommodate, trying to keep your mouth closed on the issues. Those are about economic independence that allows you to do your politics. The reason we were so successful as Mangrove is because nobody was paying us. We were paying ourselves. And you've got to create businesses that pay your politics. And if you create businesses that pay the politics, then no man, no power on earth can cut you down. Even though they came after the Mangrove and they've come after me since in very big ways, we've managed to survive their attack because they ain't paying our bills. So economic independence is the root of Garveyism and Pan-Africanism, and liberation politics, revolutionary politics, is the key to your future.
How do you feel about reparations? Do you think that's something Marcus Garvey, do you think that, is it too far gone now? Should we just forget about it? Is it still relevant? How would Garvey feel about it?
I think Garvey would be 100% for reparations. I think that what we witnessed during the Magna Misa, as we now call it, was the greatest crime in modern human history. It's unprecedented. That we are still here as descendants of those on my father's side, descendants of enslaved Africans, is an incredible testament to our strength and so on. I think we deserve it. I think we should organise around it, and I think we should force this government to pay for one of the greatest crimes in human history. So whatever people think about independence, those Caribbean nations, those African nations, they're not independent. They're actually strapped into the global economy that is structured to oppress and depress its people to the extent that poverty pays in Jamaica and poverty pays in Africa.
So how would you feel this money could be paid? I mean, could we just say write off all the debts that the African and Caribbean countries owe, or do you think that we still, even if we write up all the debts, we still owe them something? And if we do owe them something, how are we going to say, well, here's your share, here's your share?
I don't think government should be anywhere involved in the debate about reparations. I think we should set up our own reparationary councils, and that money should come to the people. Because if that money gets wiped off government debt, all it will mean is the fat cats will get fatter at the top of government. I think that what we've got to say is it wasn't our government, these little puppet regimes carrying out the behalf of the West, that are going to get the reparations money. It should be us, the people, the real descendants of those that were enslaved. So I think that we need to set up our own reparations councils that can be the recipient of money that can be used to create a black economy that can liberate us even from our own puppet government regimes. As we look to the future, it is time to have resources to protect ourselves and, if necessary, leave this country. I don't think we should rule that out, because our parents left Jamaica when it got hell to come here, right? And if we have to leave here again, then there's only one place we should be heading, back to the African continent. Thank you very much.
We are the children of Africa, the past, the present and the future.
We are Africa. We are 2,000 languages, thousands of ethnicities. We are spread across the African continent and the rest of the world. We speak every language. We do everything. We are Africa. Africa is everyone.
we're a collection of people who have a shared history and identity, and we're trying to find our way.
Now Aqua, one of the founder members of Pack 45 Young Roots, is concerned about young people finding their own identity.
Now, you're one of the chief motivators and founders of this Pan Youth organisation. You're separate in that you're just really involved in the youth. Can you tell me how you came about being involved in that, please?
Yes, so I was elected as the General Secretary of the University of Manchester Students' Union in March, and then I met Colette, who was talking at the Operations Black Vote van outside the university. Went in to kind of chat to whoever was in there, and then she told me about this event. And then she was also speaking at something else at the union. So I spoke to her more about it, and we kind of got together. So I was involving myself, Robert, and Jordan, who's the president of Manchester Metropolitan Students' Union. And we all kind of got together and said, we want to really, get this youth day completely fantastic and move it on. So it was absolutely great. And Robert had the great idea of making it something very different, very interactive, so that actually the youth have a voice and can lead the debate. Because what happens very often is youth don't really feel like they have the voice. They are told things, they're spoken at, and we wanted to change that and actually say what you think actually matters most, and that's how it should be in terms of talking about issues for our generation and being the generation that will next take charge. For us to understand about Africa and Pan-Africanism, youth have to find their identity, and that's something that we've kind of lost. We're very much, I was born in this country, but my parents are Ghanaian, and it's finding that they are very much in touch with their Ghanaian roots, and they still speak the language. I don't, I only speak English, and it's finding that aspect of being African still, while still tackling the fact that you've actually probably never lived there. Some people have never even been there, and how do you find that? So we decided to go back to the basis. So our questions were around who are we, where do we come from, where are we going, what we're doing now, and really trying to get the foundation of our ideas with the Pan-African spirit in it.
I hope we're going into a more positive place, and I think we all need to work hard to realise how everything that we do has an impact, and we need to make this future better, not worse.
Now it's the point of doing things. So obviously we're having like little discussions and getting people in the know. Now it's actually living through that knowledge.
Are you of the sort of Garveyism attitude that Dr. Johnson, for example, that we're never going to get equal rights, we have to do things for ourselves? Or do you believe, look, this is we're born here, so we should stay here?
I'm not of the separatists. I think by being separate, we move ourselves maybe to an enclosed group, and in a way sometimes that causes more tension to others because it's a suspicion thing of what are they doing, and not that they should be suspicious, but I think all coloured people should unite, because then our voices are even stronger, because there's certain things, yes, African, Asian people, Muslim people, Christian people have differences in the ways they want to go about it, but there are underlining institutional racism that we are all facing because we've got some colour in our skin, whether or not you were African or Asian, and I think we need to really tackle those problems together, and then we can talk about our differences later, but there are some overall issues that we need to talk about. So I'm very much in a collaborative, working with everyone, because we're not represented at all across them. So if we start to say I'm not represented because this person's not, then we're definitely not going to get where we need to be.
Our people are going to be at the forefront of this changing environments that we're coming into.
Si Murray is an expert in climate change and its effect on Africa.
As well as being the people who are going to be most affected, our people are the people who are least responsible. If we look at historically the processes that have brought us to this brink, we're looking at those processes from the Industrial Revolution, we're looking at colonialism, we're looking at Columbus's journeys, we're looking at the destruction of land, destruction of fauna, destruction of peoples, destruction of traditional ways of living with the planet in harmony with the earth and with nature.
Surely the climate change is a climate change, whoever you are, so how in particular are black communities affected?
Definitely, so it's linking up the legacies that we've talked about throughout this conference, so the legacies of colonialism, imperialism, chattel enslavement, and the ongoing maangamizi, the Kiswahili term for Holocaust. So we're still facing all these attempts at destruction on our lives, and as such we inhabit the poorest impoverished areas of the earth, our lands across the continent and the diaspora are under attack from things like genetically modified crops. They're being introduced into Africa. So minerals from the land are being stolen from us without any compensation or without adequate money being given to us for the true value. So Europe and America are still continuing to extract from African lands without compensating, without giving us the benefit, without us benefiting from the land ourselves. The example I used was the Ogoni community in Nigeria, and that's a minority community in the Delta, and they have been squashed by the Nigerian government and the oil industry. They've historically extracted oil from their community but given nothing back. You know, the wealth for the oil has gone to Lagos, has gone to the capitals and the cities of Nigeria and to Europe. But the Ogoni community has oil-saturated soil, it has gas flares, very, very few paved roads. So there's a huge wealth has been extracted, but very little has gone to the people themselves. The idea of justice needs to be raised and needs to be to the fore because, as we said, without our voices, those decisions are going to be made for us. And I need to mention that this is a reparations fight. This is all connected.
Another aspect of Pan-Africanism that you're particularly interested in is reparations. Now, tell me why you feel that, I mean, is it just African countries or Caribbean countries? Where do you feel the need for reparation?
There's a history of other communities getting repairs. The most famous is after the Jewish Holocaust, they were given land in Israel. And obviously there's problematics with that now, how, you know, looking at Zionism and the treatment of Palestinians.
Yes.
But I mean, this is a framework that United Nations themselves document about, you know, if people have suffered trauma, if people have suffered genocide and a Holocaust, we're talking about these, you know, legacies, these huge destruction of life, there should be repair.
But the difference between the Holocaust, which was a horrendous thing, is that, okay, was it 1948 Israel? About 1948 Israel was created. Now, the Holocaust was only a few years before that, so the people who were given Israel were either involved in that or had very close links. Now, we're talking many, many hundreds of years. Slavery was. Now, all these, you, myself, these two gentlemen here, we're all descendants of slaves in some ways. So why should any of us four should be given money and says because this is what's happened to your great granddad?
So compensation is one aspect of reparations. Let's make that clear from the start. So there's a lot more in there. It's about holistic repair, it's about repairing land, relationships, our psyches, psychological damage.
Obviously you can't trace everybody's ancestors, so you should have a 5, you should have 20, you can't do it like that. So how do you want this money to be paid and who to?
The reparations movement is about building that community cohesion, building the voices to get together and to say, okay, and do the accounting. So what do we need in our community? So it wouldn't be me that's deciding that. It would be me in consultation with the elders, with the youth, to really look at individual communities and any money is put into projects. It's not given to individuals. I think that's
impossible.
No, it's possible. Yeah, impossible. It has to be. Yeah, we talk about land, we're talking about education programs, and that call must be defined and come from the communities themselves.
Robert Kroll is also a founder member of Pact 45 Young Roots, but as a delegate, what is he hoping to learn from the event?
One of the reasons why I became part of this movement is to learn more about my Pan-African history and learn more about my heritage. And I believe that because we're all human beings living on this planet that's suspended in space, nothing holding us up or down, life is a lot deeper than segregating myself into specific sex or religion. So I'd say I'm not a Pan-African, I'm a human being having a spiritual experience. However, I felt that I wanted to take part in this movement so I can understand more about my perception of life through the lens of an African.
The idea that history is all about kings and queens is the way that people in Europe present their history. But when you go to school, all you learn about is kings and queens. You don't learn about people like us. So I want to know the history of Africa, which is about people like us, and it's not the history of kings and queens.
Whether you agree with it or not, it's still the Pan-African Conference. So how did you become part of that?
I mean, when I was younger, I watched all the documentaries, Malcolm X, Gandhi. I studied on politics and philosophy, culture studies and sociology in my master's and my BA honours degree. And I found that there was a lot going on in the world that I didn't quite understand. And because I perceive everyone to be equal, just in my own nature and my love for God, I realised that when I was walking the street or when I was in class or when I wanted to go for a job, I wasn't being accepted on the same level as everyone else. So I'm fully aware of how I am treated as an African person, and I wanted to understand more. So instead of just being a participant and an observer, I wanted to take part, help organise the conference so that I could have a much greater understanding of how it works and how people have worked so hard before me so that I could get to this point today.
And why are you particularly interested in the youth part of this conference?
Well, my issue is that young people are the leaders for the future, you know, and we need to educate our young people so that they know what the issues are, historically and spiritually, so that they can liberate themselves and emancipate themselves from that, but also create action-based solutions to create a more equal society. And in order to do that, they've got to edify themselves and do the research and investigate in their own time, come to their own conclusions. And what we need to do is provide a safe shared space so that they can have those conversations and do that research without feeling threatened and without feeling that they're going to be labelled as an extremist or any other label that the government or any community or religion wants to place on them.
In the Garvey movement, we don't believe in mixed race. We don't believe that black men should be with anything other than a black woman. In Garvey's life, you cannot join the UNIA if your wife didn't look like your mother. Why are we changing up now?
Yesterday, Dr. Umar Johnson made some, I wouldn't say controversial because it's his opinion, but he went along the lines of separatism in some ways. And how do you feel about that kind of, for what Dr. Johnson, do you agree with what he said or do you have issues with what he said?
Well, I don't believe in a separatist movement. I believe in a holistic movement. And we've got issues that we need to deal with as melanated people. And those issues we have to find solutions to. And we need to move forward in providing those solutions and delivering them to people that are melanated. And with that in point, we live on a planet not separated from anything. This is just one living organism out of all the solar system. So for us to live peacefully together, everybody on the planet needs to live peacefully. So that means everybody needs to be integrated into that process, because I don't believe you can have one people living peacefully on a planet and another people living unpeacefully on a planet and feel that there's a peaceful settlement to be resolved. I truly believe that for all of us to live peacefully, the Pan-African to live peacefully on this planet, everybody needs to live peacefully on this planet so that we can experience that peace together.
My dad was from Nigeria, but he absolutely despised West Indian people. He always told us they were slaves, they were inferior, not to mix with them. And in 1991 I went to Nigeria to meet his family for the first time, and I was so shocked and disappointed by the way I was treated as a returning daughter of Africa, which is how I saw it. The first day I was there, I went for a walk in the street. A total stranger approached me and said, "You're half white, you better go home, they will beat you." The second day I was there, I was talking to a gentleman outside my auntie's house, and she said to me, "Oh, don't talk to that man, he's from the Ibu tribe." And the thing that shocked me was just how much tension, how much mistrust there is amongst the various ethnicities and tribes within Africa itself. And until Africa itself sorts out all its prejudices, all its past histories, that will make it very, very difficult for Pan-Africanism to exist. It's fine in Europe and America where there's far more cohesion between the various black Pan-African movement, but Africa itself has so many problems accepting each other as fellow Africans that until that is resolved, it will always be a problem.
My goal and objective is to tackle this violence as the primary issue, because we cannot achieve any other type of unity if our people are killing each other. It's just not going to happen.
Temi, a young youth worker from London, actively campaigns against the violence and traumas associated with growing up within the black community.
So growing up, I lived on Graham Park Estate, which is in northwest London, and I'd say my upbringing wasn't probably much different from any other people growing up in inner cities in the UK. There was a lot of trauma and a lot of violence in the environment, and I think for me it's something learning more recently that those kind of traumatic experiences that you go through at a young age clearly influence and the way that you develop into adulthood. And so when we see a lot of violence in our communities, of course it's going to be linked to the kind of traumatic experiences that we've suffered through growing up. But not just that, I like to speak about the kind of intergenerational trauma, the things that we carry with us, because of what we've been through as a people. And I feel like we carry those things, and when we live in traumatic environments, it just only kind of exasperates the effects of the ongoing trauma that we've suffered as a people. So I would say that's a really, good way to look at the violence that we see in our communities, because otherwise we're not going to understand how and where they come from. If we misidentify the kind of issue, how are we going to have any kind of accurate solutions?
Well, the name Temi sounds Nigerian, am I correct on that?
It is a Nigerian name. It was actually given to me as a nickname by my auntie, but my full name is Temwani, and that's a Zambian name. It means rejoice. I think when I was growing up, I didn't respond to that well. I mean, it wasn't cool to be African. When I went to secondary school, I felt quite a lot of shame. I think people around me noticed that I didn't really like my full name and that I wouldn't like being called it, and so people would call me that to wind me up. And I used to get at my mum. My mother is white, and so I'll ask her, why did you let my dad give me a name? Like, why would you let him name me? Like, why couldn't you just give me a normal name so I wouldn't have felt so kind of displaced?
At what point did you decide, well, I am African and I'm going to embrace that rather than feel embarrassed?
I mean, I haven't seen my dad since I was about 11, and so it was not anything to do with him or his family why I kind of accepted that at some point. But I think it was just me growing and understanding a bit more about history, our history, and how my place in that, where I fit in the modern day in that history.
Now, you were brought up by your white mother. Did your white mother ever try and make you white? Say, well, look, your dad's not here, so did you ever have that kind of...
No, my mum had a very good cultural understanding of, she grew up around black people in the same way. She listened to black music, she cooked black food, she knew how to cook African food from the country that my dad came from. She knew how to cook Caribbean food as well. I just didn't see her as she's white. That's my mum, And to be honest, I learned much about black culture from my mum. Of course, that's not, it's a weird thing to say, but if my mum wasn't the way she was, I don't think I would have had much understanding of what it did mean to be black. And it's interesting that it was my white mum that did teach me about that, but that's the truth. But my mum's also rooted in, Turkish Cypriot. So later on, I did find out that my great-granddad, so my mum's granddad, did not accept it, and he never met me, and he disowned her afterwards. But as a lot of people spoke about during this conference, the experience of those white women who do have, who are with black people and who do have mixed race children. My mum was spat on because of me. My mum went through a lot of things because she had me and was, as I said, ostracized from that side of her family.
Yes.
And I think it all depends on the individuals, because if you have two people who are very rooted in their own, cultures, when they have a mixed race child, that child will be able to learn about what is home to them, where they can call home and where their roots are.
Contrasting to America, the idea of being mixed race is much more common in the UK, and we have to embrace that, because otherwise there are a lot of young people that are going to miss out. I felt like actually politically I had no other choice but to identify with black, because I'm perceived as being black, which means I'm going to be oppressed as a black person, which means I am black. But do you not think that's a bit challenging for me then in my personal life to completely ignore one side of my identity?
So what is your view on Pan-Africanism? Are you a little bit, well, I'm born in this country, I'm British, but I'm going to carry my African roots on within British society?
I can't say I'm fully Pan-Africanist, because there are certain things, especially in this conference, that I'm still learning about it as a process, and I felt a little unwelcomed at some of the comments about traditional Garveyism and what that has to say about, people being mixed race, and I did feel completely disconnected from that, and I felt I was made to feel quite uncomfortable, because I think identity is a very individual thing, and maybe as a mass movement people would prefer you to pick a side, but I've never felt it was like that, and I think that's not really true to my actual identity, which is a personal thing.
Sat there amongst other people attending the conference, I found some of the comments hard to accept. For me, it came across as racist. I'm of mixed heritage, and I found it hard to accept the Garveyite Pan-African ideology that wouldn't allow someone to become a member just because they're white. but I can't deny there was something uplifting about attending an event where the main aims and objectives were people trying to improve the lives and conditions of black people, not just in Europe and America, but more importantly in Africa.